Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Coffee with Crestwood today. We're going to give people just a moment to continue logging in, and we'll get started shortly. Good morning again to everyone. For those of you who just joined, we're giving people just a moment to log in, and we'll get started momentarily. All right, we are a couple minutes past our starting time, so we will kick the webinar off. So thank you again for joining us for Coffee with Crestwood. This morning, we will be talking about building strong partnerships with subcontractors. Just a little housekeeping. We do have everybody muted, but the Q&A is open. If you have any questions during the webinar, I will be monitoring those. Please feel free to enter any questions you'd like, and we will address them towards the end of the presentation. Just to introduce myself, my name is Sean Garrity. I'm a client success manager at Crestwood. I manage a number of Acumatica accounts as well as work closely with our Crestwood products division. Along with me today is Robert Sternberg. He's our director of Acumatica services, and he will be presenting the information regarding building strong partnerships with our subcontractors today. As you can see in our agenda here, we're just going to go over a few topics, and at this point, I will turn it over to Robert and let him begin presenting.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Sean. So today we're going to be working on subcontractor relationships, and three areas that we're going to focus on today are: first, how do we record this performance information? We're going to look at some out-of-the-box Acumatica technical tools to do that. And then we're going to close it out with some reporting options you have to work closely with your subcontractors. And to kick us off today, I wanted to start with a quote by the late Steve Jobs that says, "Great things in business are never done by one person. They're done by a team of people." And that, I think, is a fantastic representation of why subcontractor relationships are so important. As we move through today, I do want to reach back to a presentation that we did just a few weeks ago on supplier relationships. If you have not seen that presentation, please take a moment to watch it through. It covers some of the foundation and fundamentals behind how we think about relationships inside of Acumatica. And Kayla's going to put a link in the chat if you have not seen that webinar. So this is a great starting point that we'll expand on today with a slight technical twist. So subcontractor relationships, why are they so important? It's because a subcontractor relationship is an extension of your brand, right? There are some common factors behind our subcontractor relationships that we like to keep an eye on, and it's pretty consistent across organizations. We want them to be timely and reliable. We want them to have a high quality standard, and then we need those to be consistent. Consistency is just as important because we will not always be there, right? So understanding that they're going to be upholding our brand behind the scenes is so important. And that's why today we're going to take a technical view on how to approach this, because everyone's organization is different. So 3 of those areas: technical tools. We're going to go through and talk about some of the best practices for recording that data as well, and then how to report. So we'll start with the technical tools aspect. And there's 2 main areas in Acumatica that can record unique information for your organization to make sure that that brand extension is responsible. And these 2 options do not require any developer customization. This is out of the box Acumatica, 2 different flavors. One is called a user-defined field, which is commonly abbreviated as UDF. And the second is an attribute. And they have quite a lot in common, but just a few that are specific to UDFs and attributes independently. So if we look in the upper left, I'll talk about UDFs for just a moment. They are recorded in the summary section of your documents on a special tab at the top called User-Defined Fields. And we'll see all of this information in just a moment. They use Acumatica native security, so you can restrict access to particular UDF fields or the UDF tab entirely. They're available in a separate tab from the rest of the Acumatica information, so it's separated individually at the top. And then they do display any requirements. So if you make a UDF field required, it will mark that in the screen itself. Attributes are recorded in an attributes tab on each screen. So you can think of this at the line level of any document. And they actually list the requirement in a checkbox separate from the attribute itself. Regardless of whether we decide to use UDFs or attributes, they are going to be created using the attribute screen in Acumatica. And that's key to remember because it sounds a little counterintuitive, but the attributes screen is going to be the starting point for both UDFs and attributes. I'm towards that bottom section of the screen now. They're also both available natively for reporting. So whether you're using generic inquiries, dashboards, pivot tables, you're able to pull the information from UDFs and attributes together natively. And the last is they both support multiple formats. Again, we'll be moving into some specifics. You'll see some examples in just a moment. They support integer values, text, checkboxes, date and time formats. So it's quite flexible in how we would align UDFs and attributes for that brand extension. So before we jump in and look at those specifically, let's talk about placement. There are many areas inside of Acumatica that we might want to record additional information for that brand extension. I'm listing just a few on the screen now, but it can be a little bit more difficult to understand where we want to place that information. So we work on a 3-part system, and that begins with organizing the different options. And you can see the organization on the right-hand side of the screen, and we place the largest entity for consideration at the top of the list. In this example, it's the vendor. So a vendor can have multiple projects, it can have multiple purchase orders, it can have multiple bills. That's why it's at the top of the list. We work our way down. I'll do one more example. Project. A project can have multiple tasks. A project can have multiple purchase orders. So that's how we work our way down in that list. If we get to a moment where the entity does not encompass another, then we start to work in chronological order, or the most likely chronological order. And that would allow us to collect the information earlier in the process to start using it more effectively. So in this case, I'm looking at the lower 3 options: purchase order, receipt, and AP bill. And the most likely chronological order is in fact that. So this would allow us to collect information earlier on. The goal for the next two steps will be to stay at the top of this list unless we're forced to move down by one of the other two options. So if I'm looking at recording additional information, I'd like to stay at that vendor level unless one of the next two steps forces us down. The next step we evaluate is where are we going to apply or record this information? So for instance, if we're recording specifics about a purchase receipt, which will be one of our examples today, that would force us down lower in the list because information might be different for each purchase receipt rather than just recording it at the vendor level. So that would force us further down in the list. And that next step and last step is how do we want to report on this information? If we stay at the vendor level, the project level, then we would not be able to receive information about each individual AP bill, for example. So if we know that we want to report at a lower level, then that would force us down the list. So we organize, we understand where are we going to apply or record that information, and then where are we going to report on that information. So the two examples today that we're going to look at are vendor attributes, and I'm recording the date of the last performance review, which gives us an opportunity to keep our attributes and information up to date. And then we're also going to record whether a rush service is available. And this can help us make decisions on what vendors we're going to use when we have tighter timelines. The third example is going to be in a purchase order screen, and that's going to be a UDF, and it's going to be a quality and receipt score. This would be something that we want on the individual receipts and shows that we are consistently delivering items in a timely manner and of high quality. So that really goes back to how do we manage our relationships with subcontractors. So I'm going to switch over now to a live demo, and we're going to walk through that process. Wonderful. So we're going to start on the attribute screen in Acumatica. And remember, both UDFs and attributes start at this stage. So we're going to create our attributes for the vendor first, which are going to be the last reviewed. And then we're also going to create a rush service available. So I'll give that an attribute ID that's easily used in other areas as well, because last reviewed does not only need to apply to a vendor record. We could use this in other areas of the system. Just an example for today. I'll call that last reviewed date. As I mentioned earlier, there's multiple control types available for attributes and UDFs in the system. So in this case, I'm going to use the date time as our control type, and that will let me select date inside of the vendor screen as I look at the last reviewed date. Simply saving that record will create the attribute, and I can use it as I navigate through the system. We have one more to create on the vendor record, and that's going to be the rush service available. So I'll use my plus icon at the top of the page and create a brand new attribute for rush available. Once we have that created, we're going to assign the checkbox control type. And once we assign the checkbox control type, we're going to be able to use this around the system as well. So rush avail will be our rush available. And our control type is just going to be a checkbox. And we'll see this example as I work my way through the system. If we're applying this across a set of records, there's different areas that we can do this inside of Acumatica. And classes are the section where we would add new attributes across an entire group of vendors. Remember, classes are a category with defaults with intelligence. That's the definition of a class inside of Acumatica. So I'm going to come under the Attributes tab for the product class of vendors. And I'm going to add the two attributes we just created. So that would be last reviewed. And I'm also going to create the rush available. Inside of Acumatica, I can set a sort order for my attributes. So I'll sort that in the operations of 1 and 2. So last reviewed will be first. I can list whether this attribute is required to save this record. I can list whether this attribute appears in the customer portal. In this case, we're looking on the vendor side. So we see that option that is not available. And then I can also set a default value. So maybe I want to say that by default, I'm going to assume all of our product vendors do have rush service available, or I can assume that they all do not, and I can move forward from that stage. So I'll save the new attributes on the vendor classes screen. And the next time I navigate to a vendor record, under my attributes tab, I will have the last reviewed date and the rush available. And you'll notice that I have the checkbox that describes whether the attribute is required by the system. So this is a read-only checkbox. I can simply double-click and add a value for their last review and mark whether that rush service is available for this particular vendor. This attribute will stay at this level going forward, so it's helpful in that fact. Now we'll move on to a user-defined field, and this is going to be our quality and receipt score for our purchase orders. So I'll come in and I will give this one the title of QA score, and I'll say quality score. This would be for our receipts. And this one, we're going to use a combo box. And this combo box, I'm going to have values 1 through 10 in a drop-down list, with 10 being the highest. So this is pretty quick to create. I'll say 1 and lowest. And with the sort order, I will match that as well. And then we'll come through and we'll go up to 5 here. And I'll say 5 highest. And I'll save that. I can always come back in and add additional values and descriptions for our dropdown later on. And I can also disable values if I'm no longer using them. So that's a really great option for defining combo boxes for dropdown values. For this example, I want to add it as a user-defined field to a purchase receipt. So I'm going to come into my purchase receipt screen, and I'm going to look under the customization menu for manage user-defined fields. If you don't see this option, you will require the customizer user role. So I'll use the manage user-defined fields option. We'll say you currently do not have any user-defined fields, and I'll add a user-defined field at the top. And I'm going to call that my QA score. I can choose where that appears on the user-defined field screen. So for right now, because this is my first user-defined fields, I will leave that at 1 and 1. I'll click OK, and I see my new user-defined field. Under the Properties tab, I can say what document types it applies to. And I can also mark whether it is required, whether it is hidden, and we're just going to report on it later, but cannot be changed. And again, set that default value. So these are 2 ways to add fields in Acumatica without developer customization to record specifics for your subcontractors. If I return to my previous page, my purchase receipt, I'll see a new tab at the top called User-Defined Fields. And I can navigate into that tab to set the quality score. So this is fantastic as we record information inside of the system. And again, user-defined fields and attributes can be recorded on multiple screens. These are just examples of where they can be placed. So now we've added a few attributes to the vendor screen, last reviewed date and rush available, as well as a user-defined field to the purchase receipt screen. So how do we report on this information? Well, as I mentioned, that is native to Acumatica, and I can modify my generic inquiry for vendors. And under my results grid, Acumatica automatically extends the information to include that attribute data. So if I start typing for attributes, I see my rush available attribute and my last reviewed attribute. I can simply add that to my generic inquiry. Last reviewed, I'll save. And then when I view that new generic inquiry, I can sort, filter, and run reports off of that information at the vendor level. So I can pull my rush available all the way to the left-hand side. And then if I needed to record information or I needed to order something quickly, I could simply filter and say, show me just the vendors that have rush available marked. If I'm creating a subcontractor program, I could certainly say we need a review every year. And we could create filters on their last review to make sure that we're keeping in pace with that standard. Similar on our list of purchase receipts, even with that being a UDF, I can come in and make some adjustments to that generic inquiry. Again, automatically extended to the PO receipt table for the QA score. So I can save that information. And now on all my purchase receipts, I have their QA score inside of that grid. So 5 would be the highest in this case. Those are really great ways to use fields in Acumatica without needing to customize. So I'll switch back now to our presentation, and I have a few best practices that we'll go over as well. Okay, best practices inside of Acumatica when you're creating UDFs, when you're creating attributes. First, use the highest level available. Right, that goes back to our organization. We want to record as much information early on in the process and without duplication as possible. The second is always prefer calculations over manual entry. So when you can record whether an order was on time by a checkbox for a UDF field on a purchase receipt, that requires user interaction. We talked about a methodology in our last session where we could calculate whether an order was on time. So if you haven't seen that, go watch the YouTube video Kayla posted in the chat. That would allow you to calculate this information and save yourself a manual step. The third is keep expansion and adjustments in mind. As you're setting your attribute values, as you're working to understand where inside of the system an attribute or a UDF can be used, understand that we can use the same last reviewed in the customer record, in the vendor record, as a sales order use defined field. So you have the ability to expand where an attribute is used. It does not necessarily need to be one for each document. And the last is to use requirements sparingly and specifically. And this might sound counterintuitive as well, but using requirements sparingly means that we're really intentional and we're not creating frustration for our users, because requirements do mean that the field has to be complete before we save a record. So it will interrupt the save process to force a user to go complete an attribute or a UDF. With that being said, it is a powerful tool, so using it responsibly is important. Also, if you're using import scenarios or have integrations, the requirement applies in those scenarios as well. So due diligence to make sure that we're not interrupting some of the connected processes in our system are certainly appreciated. So what's next as we walk through this? I know we're running close on time today, but there's so much we can do with UDFs and attributes. We'd be excited to explore this with you. Here are 4 fantastic options that you can use with attributes and UDFs. First is going to be business events, and business events can run import scenarios. So when you set an attribute, we can update information inside of the system, or we can use it to send email notifications. So something might require additional review. We looked at how to put attributes and UDFs inside of generic inquiries. And those generic inquiries can be turned into performance dashboards. So you can get information on the fly about trends for your subcontractor performance and make meaningful conversations happen. So that way we can align that brand extension. So we're protecting what our customers see. So with that, I will turn it over to Sean and the group for a quick Q&A.
Thank you, Robert. That was some great information. I'm sure everybody loves the idea of being able to do a little bit of customization on their own without having to pay for full-blown development. So that was excellent. I would like to open up the floor to anyone that has questions. Microphones are still disabled, so if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A, and I'm more than happy to address those for you. I do have one question here, Robert. Is there any concern with UDFs and attributes in terms of upgrading? Any considerations that need to be thought of ahead of time when creating those?
That's a great question. So attributes and UDF fields are not developer customization. They are built in and native to the Acumatica framework, so they will roll forward through upgrades. As always, we recommend thorough testing. In general, we should not have any issues there.
Excellent. That's great news. Yep. It's always anything that you can do to add functionality, but keep your system working smoothly and efficiently without causing problems during upgrades is a wonderful feature. I don't have any other questions in the Q&A, but I will leave it open for a moment to see if any questions do pop in here. We will go over a quick recap here in regard to next steps. So creating UDFs and attributes to support brand extensions. We're able to add insights to common inquiries to track this insight. And we're always able to adjust for continuous improvement. Once you make a UDF or an attribute, it doesn't mean that it's done forever and locked down. You can adjust as needed. And more importantly than anything to mention is that the Crestwood team is more than happy to help you with this. While we are happy to show this functionality and give you the ability to create these fields and attributes on your own, we're more than happy to leverage our consulting team to help, even if it's not with the specific creation of the field or the attribute, but to just have that conversation with you to help figure out exactly what's needed, what level should we be placing the field or attribute that we're creating at, and help with any type of design. As you can see, you're able to reach out to your CSM directly, or you can always contact Crestwood CSM team at crestwood.com, and we're more than happy to put the appropriate resource in touch with you. If there are no other questions here today, then I guess we will close out the webinar and give everybody just a minute or two back of their day. But we really appreciate everyone taking time to join us for Coffee with Crestwood. And if you have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Hey, Sean, we do have a few questions in the Q&A section if you want to take a look.
Oh, I do see one there. Yep. All right, Robert, let me run this by you and see what you have to say. If we want to add an attribute to subcontractor purchase orders, what would you suggest?
So I think I would need to know a little bit more about the attribute, and it looks like we might even have that. So if we have a job task at a fairly high level material, what else could we use? So if we're looking at a project task, there's actually attributes at the project task level that we could leverage, and it would depend on when we're going to have that information available to us. So if we're looking at subcontractor purchase orders and we have that information at the time of placing the order, purchase orders do support UDF fields. We can add it at the purchase order level and then report on it at the purchase order, project, and vendor level. That would be one option. Mike, we can certainly follow up to get a little bit more detail about what you're thinking in terms of attributes and when, where to record them. In general, we'd like to understand what's the highest level where we would still have that information. It sounds like we'd be looking at purchase order UDFs.
Absolutely. Like this is Sean. I'm happy to reach out and we can touch base and figure out next steps from there. Excellent. Well, again, I'd like to thank everybody for taking a few minutes for us today. We know everybody has very busy days, so appreciate you taking the time to spend a half hour with us today. And please don't hesitate to contact us if you have additional questions or would like to discuss UDFs or attributes further. We're more than happy to do so. So thank you again, and everybody have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.